The US dollar commands nearly 60% of global foreign exchange reserves and prices virtually every barrel of oil sold on the planet. Yet, the nation printing that money carries a $34 trillion national debt and routinely runs annual trade deficits exceeding $1 trillion. Year after year, Americans consume significantly more physical goods from overseas than they sell back to the rest of the world. For an individual, spending more than you earn leads to bankruptcy, but on a national scale, it creates a massive contradiction. Standard economic logic suggests a leading superpower should be an export powerhouse, yet the United States constantly owes the rest of the planet money. This is known as the Triffin Dilemma. When the global economy relies on your currency to function, those massive deficits represent a mathematical requirement. To supply the world with liquidity, the issuer must continuously push its currency out across its borders. To understand the hidden plumbing of modern American geopolitical power, we have to look back at the specific financial architecture engineered at the close of the Second World War. In July 1944, delegates from 44 Allied nations gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The United States held roughly 75% of the world's monetary gold at the time, giving it the leverage required to dictate the terms of the post-war economic order. The British delegation was led by economist John Maynard Keynes, who proposed a neutral global currency called the Bancor. Keynes argued that a supranational asset would prevent any single nation from exploiting the system for an unfair economic advantage. The American delegation rejected it. Led by Treasury official Harry Dexter White, the U.S. imposed a dollar-centric design. Under White's blueprint, all international currencies would be pegged to the U.S. dollar, and the dollar itself would be pegged to gold at exactly $35 an ounce. By forcing the world to trade in dollars, White's blueprint granted America an exorbitant privilege. For the first time, a single nation could finance its international obligations simply by issuing its own currency, creating a structural dependency that would eventually force the U.S. to choose between its global role and its domestic stability. To supply a rebuilding world with the dollars it needed for trade and reserves, the U.S. had to import more goods than it exported. Supplying global liquidity effectively required running permanent trade deficits. Tracing the cycle, the loop becomes clear. Physical goods flow into the U.S., while dollars flow to foreign exporters. Craving stable assets, central banks reinvest those dollars back into U.S. Treasury bonds. In the 1960s, printing billions meant overseas dollars rapidly dwarfed the actual gold reserves held in U.S. vaults. The Triffin Dilemma had reached its breaking point. Facing a run on Fort Knox as foreign nations panicked and demanded their gold, President Richard Nixon acted unilaterally in 1971. He severed the dollar's peg to gold, officially ending the fixed-rate system. Without gold, the currency needed a new anchor. The U.S. found it in the Middle East, securing agreements with OPEC nations to price global oil exports exclusively in U.S. dollars. The dollar survived the collapse of its own underlying rules by transitioning from a gold-backed asset to one backed by the world's reliance on energy and the depth of U.S. capital markets. Today, this architecture serves as a powerful geopolitical weapon. Because the majority of global transactions run through dollar-based clearinghouses, the United States can freeze adversary assets and sever entire nations from the global economy via sanctions. But this power has a flip side, the exorbitant duty. The rest of the world's insatiable demand for U.S. Treasury bonds as a safe haven keeps the value of the dollar high against other currencies. A persistently strong dollar makes American exports more expensive for overseas buyers, while making foreign imports cheaper for Americans. This creates a mathematical incentive to offshore factories, contributing to the hollowing out of the U.S. manufacturing base. This domestic cost has fueled a global backlash. BRICS nations, including Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are now actively pursuing de-dollarization, attempting to settle bilateral trade in their own local currencies to bypass U.S. leverage. Dethroning the dollar is a monumental task. The $24 trillion U.S. Treasury market offers a level of liquidity and transparency that rivals like the euro or the Chinese yuan simply cannot match. There is currently no other market large enough to absorb the world's surplus wealth. The US dollar maintains its position because America is uniquely positioned to sacrifice its own trade balance to act as the world's financial engine. It is a structural bargain, paid for with a permanent mountain of debt.